So, at first sight, it might be surprising to link Sade with the issue of institutions, but an impressive series of, particularly French theorists, philosophers, psychoanalysts, found Sade unavoidable as a...
Recording stopped.
Sorry. As an author, at least thought-provoking, besides his obvious reasons for our fascination, provocation, obscenity, and so on. So how can we situate Sade as a theorist, a thinker who questioned and even tried to invent a new kind of institutions that would allow the generalized right to enjoyment or jouissance. I'll be using the term jouissance because for people reading writing in English but are inspired or take Lacan as a reference are used not to translate the term jouissance. So, to begin with, one of the lessons to be drawn from Freud's civilization and its discontents is that jouissance, because it causes pain and suffering, is something harmful to the subject. However, this inherent cruelty of jouissance becomes a problem for modern moral and political philosophy with Sade, for whom the right to jouissance is a fundamental human right and as such universal. While the right to jouissance is inconceivable outside the horizon of human rights discourse, it represents the ultimate limit of this discourse once Sade starts asking whether jouissance, being particular by definition, presents an unsurmountable obstacle to the universal law. In the light of the antinomy of the right to jouissance and law, Sadean politics of jouissance represents the unthinkable of the philosophy of human rights. For Sade's goal is nothing less than to liberate jouissance in the subject as that which is the most intimate in him or her, yet which the subject, being submitted to the demands of civilization, perceives as something radically alien. In this respect, Sade's despotism of the passions, which establishes the rule of jouissance, offers one of the most radical attempts at finding a way out of the discontent in civilization. Sade's paradoxical solution to the problem of discontent consists in the liberation of the man of pleasure from the constraints of civilization, its laws, norms, and prohibitions. But the emancipation of pleasure from the tyranny of civilization is achieved by means of something that is even more tyrannical than civilization, jouissance or passion, to use Sade's own term. For passion, as Sade conceives of it, is transgressive, because on its way to satisfaction, passion knows no limit and remains indifferent to the price to be paid by the subject. Sade thus enters into ethics and politics as a promoter of rights, not of men, but of jouissance. But can there be something like a politic of jouissance at all, if politics is founded on a relationship with the other, whereas jouissance, being solipsistic by definition, problematizes the very status of the other? And conversely, if such project of emancipation aims at the realization of the tyranny of jouissance precisely at the level of society, then one might ask, what is the social bond that is founded on something which appears to be incompatible with it? It would appear that Sade strives for the impossible, a paradoxical social bond that is not founded on the universality of law, but on jouissance, being that which is by definition the most particular, non-universalizable, and therefore dissocializing. The contradictory nature of such an undertaking is already manifest in Sade's work itself. On the one hand, Sade advocates the most brutal despotism, even slavery. On the other hand, however, he defends the egalitarian republic. So how are we to understand this inherent antagonism of Sade's thought? The existence of two mutually exclusive political utopias, barbarian, non-egalitarian despotism on the one hand, and political and sexual egalitarianism on the other. According to today's most established interpretation, Sade's idea of the despotism of the passion, which is to be realized at the level of the socios, is self-defeating because the apology of the will to jouissance would annihilate the very possibility of the social bond. The whole point of Sade's criticism of the Enlightenment politics is to denounce the radical incompatibility of the social bond and jouissance. To the extent that jouissance isolates and separates, jouissance is the negation of the social bond. The despotism of the passion is to be taken literally. Passions enslave, demand total submission. Jouissance is inherently tyrannical. Enjoy, regardless of the price you have to pay, or better, regardless of the praise the object of your enjoyment has to pay. Only one conclusion can be drawn from the antagonistic relationship between jouissance and the social bond. There is not and can be no such a thing as a community of jouissance. It then follows that there can be no politics of jouissance either, as it can only bring about the abolition of the social bond, but this interpretation, according to which jouissance and the social bond are in a radical sense mutually exclusive, overlooks the fact that Sade must presuppose at least a minimum of sociability in order to stage the relationship of non-sociability, the violence of domination and slavery that is required for the mere satisfaction of the passions. In view of this, it would be a mistake to see in Sade a naive advocate of a return to nature. This is evident from Sade's radical reinterpretation of the relationship between the state of nature and the civil state. Sade does not conceive of the relationship between the state of nature and the civil state according to a contractual model, i.e., in terms of a mutual exclusion, where the institution of the social order involves the inevitable removal of the state of nature. In contrast, the originality of Sade consists in a vision of society where the civil and natural states coexist. How is such a coexistence possible? How can one defend the simultaneous existence of the constraining laws, the existence of a state of oppression on the one hand, and the freedom to act according to one's passion, even the most cruel, inhuman, on the other? Two answers are possible here. Just like the Enlightenment philosophers, Sade postulates that the state of nature is a state preceding the civil state. Yet, unlike the Enlightenment philosophers, the state of nature in Sade, even after the switch of paradigms, does not simply disappear, as no law can entirely eradicate passions that are considered to be a stand-in for the state of nature within the civil state. But another answer is also possible. The issue is no longer about the allowing the remnants of the state of nature to subsist in some kind of enclave within the civil state, but the actual cohabitation of the two states. According to Sade, there is no state of nature without or outside of civilization. Actually, it is only against the background of civilization, its crimes against human nature, that the will to enjoy finds its proper place. Sade somehow knows that a return to the state of nature is impossible, which is why he seeks to restore the state of nature within the social order. Sade strives for a civil state whose sole goal would be to provide the means for the maximal satisfaction of the passions. Consequently, the relationship between the state of nature and the civil state cannot be one of an opposition or a dialectical upheaval, but rather a kind of perverse alliance where the state of nature, in order to subsist, must be grafted onto the civil state. What we see at work in Sade is the civil state the continuation of the state of nature by other means, that is, by exploiting the already existing non-egalitarian social order. In seeking to realize the state of nature within the civil state, such politics of jouissance activates exactly those mechanisms that work towards the foreclosure of the state of nature from society. This means that nature in Sade is not simply outside society and precedes it, rather it necessitates society and civilization as its precondition. It is clear that for Sade, the model for society, or rather counter-society, cannot be a secret society within society, but which, precisely for that reason, continues to respect the regime in power. For the paradox of a society that strives for the implementation of the generalized right to jouissance cannot be carried out in private clubs to the installation of a subversive counter-society in the pockets of existing society. Sade is not interested in the relationship of domination at the level of privacy, which in no way threatens the existing social order or its institutions. For a counter-society established within the limits of a private club does not aspire to change the existing institution of society, but only to make use of them. What Sade aims at is rather the universalization of the will to jouissance at the social level. In short, a utopia of a society without rules, which explains the need for the institution of a natural state, a utopia that can only result in the collapse of all institutions of that world. The establishment of such a social and political order in which the excess becomes the law thus necessitates a passage from the club to the state. For the realization of this despotism of the passions in the domain of politics requires the existence of society and its institutions, ultimately the existence of the state's repressive apparatuses, whose function is to ensure that everyone, the victims in particular, complies with the Sadean principle maxim, I have the right to enjoy your body. The Sadean tormentor must have a legally warranted right to satisfy his passions, a certainty that the state itself guarantees to him the right to submit anyone to his whims. Such project for the realization of the law of nature in society implies the replacement of the existing positive law with institutions that require a minimum of laws. In order to ensure access to the jouissance for which the sadist slaves, these institutions must be primarily institutions of victimization. But precisely for that reason, Sade is faced with the following problem. Which institutional frame corresponds to the realization of the law of nature in society? That is, the law of jouissance, this being for Sade the highest and ultimately the only legitimate law. Sade does not provide us with a definite answer to this question. In fact, he offers three models for the institutionalization of the despotism of the passions: political despotism, statist communism, and a libertine republic. All three Sadean models for society have the same goal: to secure the role of passions through laws that impose a generalized corruption of the people, which is to say, a generalized debauchery. At first sight, it would seem that political despotism alone is capable of organizing society according to the law of jouissance. The commandment, enjoy, implies limitless power over the objects of jouissance, and because of its inherent inegalitarianism, it also facilitates the realization of political despotism. Debauchery, which is as such enslaving, appears to be a natural ally of the despotic power. However, we're dealing here with an instrumental, external, and thus parasitic relationship of the despotism of the passions to political despotism. Stated differently, if politics begins with the establishment of relations between free and equal individuals, despotism is confined to the private relationship between master and slave. It then follows that political despotism, although it is founded on the relationship of command-subordination, cannot be an appropriate realization of the despotism of the passions, because political despotism is, strictly speaking, not politics. Such second model of the political regime transposing the despotism of the passions to society is what could be termed statist communism. In contrast to political despotism, the main stake in this regime is the equality of all. By shifting the focus from despotism to egalitarianism, a radical mutation occurs in the relationship between passions and the law. Equality in this regime cannot be ensured in any other way than by the total transformation of human nature, ultimately by the complete eradication of the passions. The Sadean communism is possible only through the establishment of an all-powerful totalitarian state that can function only by manipulating the satisfaction of the passions, ultimately by exploiting the will to jouissance. The rules of the totalitarian state, al-Assad, consist in the abusing the passions for the realization of the social egalitarianism. Here, the libidinal economy has been mobilized to attain the maximum of equality and the minimum of political despotism, but at the cost of the complete loss of libidinal freedom. Yet neither state egalitarianism, which implements equality, but at the price of the eradication of the passions, nor political despotism, which preserves despotism, but sacrifices equality, ensures the integral transposition of the passions into politics. The solution to the problem of the despotism of the passions, the conjunction of equality and inequality, of freedom and submission offered by the Republican Sade, requires a strict separation between the despotism of the passions, which complies with the law of nature, and political despotism. The advantage of the third solution, in which the despotism of the passions requires a republic, not a tyranny, can be seen in the fact that it is no longer founded on an external instrumental relationship to the despotism of the passion, but rather on the relation of a mutual conditioning. If political anarchy or a libertine republic alone provides, according to Sade, the framework in which every citizen is a tyrant, then the institution of the right to jouissance is a precondition for the survival of the republic itself. Only on the condition that the republic complies with the principle ensuring, I quote from yet another effort, Sade's pamphlet, the perpetual immoral subversion of the established order, end quote, can it be considered to be the political form that enables the unbroken circulation of the passions. What is the basis of this short circuit of republicanism, equality, and freedom on the one hand, with the despotism of jouissance on the other? What is important about Sade's libertine republic is its paradoxical character of being based on two mutually exclusive principles, on republican equality and freedom, and at the same time on the despotic law of nature that is on equality and inequality. The difficulty here is that Sade's politics of jouissance is confronted with two incompatible requirements. On the one hand, Sade defends absolute freedom for everyone, the right of everyone to enjoy, that is, the right to submit anyone to his or her pursuit of jouissance. But on the other, no less decisively, he demands the complete submission of everyone to the imperative of jouissance. Hence, if the subject resists the law, this is not in the name of some inalienable natural right that constitutes his or her autonomy. Rather, the will to jouissance has already deprived the subject of the right to freely make use of himself or herself. Sade therefore does not acknowledge any natural right, say, to make use of one's own body. The law of nature has submitted to itself the subject from the outset, and that without the subject's consent. The solution to this deadlock is only conceivable once we realize that the right to jouissance is the jouissance's right to satisfaction. At the level of societies, however, this implies the duty to jouissance, which has to be generalized and extended to the whole society. It is obvious, therefore, why jouissance for Sade is not something private but public. Indeed, Sade demands nothing less than the state and its apparatuses of repression to impose jouissance as everyone's obligation. Sade seeks to solve what at first glance appears to be an insolvable problem: the cohabitation of the despotism of the passions and the universalization of the right to jouissance with the institutionalized universal prostitution. Insofar as the imperative of the jouissance is indiscriminately indifferent to men and women, as it requires of both the most absolute subordination. What then is equality as Sade conceives of it? According to Sade, men have the right, this right is granted to them by the law of nature, to establish such institutions and adopt such laws that force women to submit themselves to any man, regardless of their rank. But the same right is granted to women too, not in the name of reciprocity, but in the name of the imperative of jouissance, which applies to both men and women. Equality is thus possible only at the level of equality of the jouissance's unconditional demand for satisfaction, which subjugates men and women equally. The Sadean universalized prostitution should then be seen as an inevitable consequence of the law of jouissance, which disposes both men and women of their right to freely make use of their own bodies. By confiscating by their bodies, the law of Sadean nature prescribes the compulsory surrendering of one's own body to anyone and to everyone. With the institution of the generalized jus credendi, the right of use, there is no possible recourse to the principle of habeas corpus. It then comes as no surprise that the principle, your body is yours alone, establishing the body itself as the ultimate property, has no place in the libertine universe, because the Sadean body, instead of belonging to the subject of rights, belongs to the passions. Following Sade, we thus inevitably stumble on the antinomy between the subject and the body. The Sadean communism of jouissance involves the working of the flesh machine, where the group of multiple hands, mouths, and genitals constitute a single body, a group body, as it were, yet without the subject. The socialization of jouissance requires that both the victim and the sadist offer their bodies for the transformation that must bring about the institution of the despotism of the passion at the level of society. In the most radical sense, the body does not belong to the subject. There is then nothing that could be called my body. My body belongs to me as much as it belongs to anyone else, because the body as such is an object of the passions. One might say, I have the freedom to make use of the body of the other, but not my own body. Someone else is free to make use of my body. Sade's despotism of the passions sets out from the assumption that the socials can be organized according to jouissance. What is this assumption based on? Civilization, which for Sade is nothing but a defense against jouissance, is to blame because the subject incarnates a lack of jouissance. Sade is convinced that if the subject were to be freed from the demands of civilization, the subject would rediscover his or her full disposition of the passions. Sade sees civilization as robbing the body of jouissance and believes that the removals of the obstacles of civilization would restore jouissance to the body. Sade is convinced that it is possible to treat the symptoms of the civilization by removing the repression of jouissance through the subversion of the laws of civilization. Ultimately, we could say that the other, to whom jouissance should be restored, is the body itself, as it was the body that was initially stripped of jouissance. Sade therefore seeks to resuscitate in this mortified body the part of jouissance that has survived the devastation brought about by civilization. But Sade's solution is not simply to replace the state of nature with the civil state. He rather seeks to resuscitate the remainder of jouissance within the civil state, using the arsenal of civilization itself, prohibitions, law, coercion, institutions, and so on. For despite all the emphasis on the primacy of nature with the passions, as the voice of, with the passions as the voice of nature engraved into our flesh, Sade knows that the body, which is supposed to be enjoying, has nothing natural about it. Rather, it is a body that is molded by civilization. It is not an enjoying body, but a body drained of jouissance, a body that is transformed into a desert of jouissance. It then follows that jouissance cannot be achieved by merely removing civilization. It would be more appropriate to say that the Sadean jouissance is a paradoxical, as it is, as one could say, perversely linked to civilization. Because far from dealing with a natural jouissance, we are dealing instead with a renaturalized or desincultured jouissance that is obtained through the violation of civilization norms and prohibitions. Or stated differently, civilization, according to Sade, may well be harmful for the body, but precisely for that reason it enables a new kind of jouissance, a jouissance that springs from transgression. Yet Sade is not blind to the fact that the body, precisely as separated from jouissance, is capable of some other, supplementary, yet destructive jouissance. Thus, in a radical sense, there is no jouissance but in civilization. Sade's originality therefore consists in his revealing the body as a stake in a struggle between civilization and jouissance. From Sade's elaboration of the perverse jouissance, the dividing line is clearly drawn between the body of civilization, this being a unified, whole body, yet stripped of jouissance and therefore a dead body, and, on the other hand, the body of the drives or passions, which is alive, yet fragmented by the partial drives that are fighting for it. Therefore, there can be no organic unity of the Sadean body. Instead of with a unified whole body, we're dealing here with a cut-up body characterized by the mechanical montage assembling parts of the body of both tormentors and victims into a single body machine whose sole purpose is to manufacture enjoyment. That the body in Sade is presented as a battlefield of the drives is also evident from the fact that the perverse libertine is not interested in the body as such, but rather in parts of the body, cutting up the victim's body in order to focus on those parts of the body that are to be enjoyed in torture. With this body, that is the body of jouissance, because it is partitioned between the drives, each of them striving for its particular satisfaction, aims at, is certainly not its self-preservation. If anyone, then Sade convincingly shows that the enjoying body is a body split between self-preservation and self-destruction. In the perverse fragmentation of the body, we can therefore see one of the most stunning effects of the paradox of jouissance. Jouissance certainly clings to life, but to life that is literally beyond life, beyond the living body, because in striving for satisfaction, this body of jouissance passes over the barriers imposed by the self-preservation of the body organism. For the opposition between self-preservation and self-destruction corresponds to the division of the body between the body of pleasure, which knows what needs to be done to preserve itself, and the body of jouissance, the libidinal body, a derailed or erratic body whose particular parts are emancipated and could therefore become organs of jouissance, which is satisfaction regardless of the price to be paid by the organism. One of the main conclusions to be drawn from Sade is that there is a jouissance of the body, but only as the jouissance of the fragmented body, ultimately the jouissance of organs. Thus, as opposed to the Deleuzian-Guattarian body without organs, we should rather speak of organs without the body as a function of unification. It's to say, a body where the scattered organs, not unlike membra disjecta, resist any kind of organic integration or imaginary unification. Sade's ultimate objective is therefore the realization of the despotism of the passion at the level of society, yet a society that is itself transformed into a single gigantic boudoir bedroom, where an anonymous social body would become the stage of the acephalic jouissance. In Sade's despotism of the passions, we could see something like a hasty reconciliation between the subject and jouissance. For someone who takes seriously the right to jouissance, the jouissance right to satisfaction, in fact, for someone who serves the will to jouissance, the subject is nothing but an instrument of the will to jouissance. The instrumentalization of the sadist subject thus indicates that the reconciliation with jouissance leads to a radical mutation of the subject. When jouissance enters the stage, the subject fades away or dissolves. The occurrence of jouissance is the moment when there is no longer anyone who could say I. And vice versa, the disappearance of the subject, or more exactly, the subject destitution, is the solution to the impasse which consists in the impossibility of the subjectivation of jouissance. This radical antinomy between subjectivation and destitution explains why the Sadean subject cannot be the subject of the libertine operation, but can only be an object, an instrument of the other. What is at stake in the instrumentalization of the sadist who lives and slaves for jouissance is indeed the destitution of the subject by jouissance. This is because even for him, a reconciliation with jouissance, his giving consent to being nothing but the jouissance's plaything, is something insufferable, which is why he has to bring into play the other's will to jouissance. In Sade's case, this other, of course, is nature. We could therefore agree with Monique David-Menard when she detects in nature Sade's symptom. If nature is a symptom, or better perhaps a protective screen conferring legitimacy on all the fantasies of transgression, it is because Sade, a great theorist and practitioner of jouissance, flees from the evil that is inherent in jouissance when he claims that evil and destructiveness are inscribed into eternal nature. Thank you.